So you might have heard characters in this industry, this culture, this arena that we're in talk about the difference between, say, skill and technique, or technique and tactics. And today I have brought on a guest, maybe what I can't really call you a former friend, but we used to work together, and it's been a conversation I've been looking forward to having for a long time. So, Mike Meegan, who are you and where are you at now?
Well, thanks, Coop. I appreciate you having me. So I am Sergeant First Class Michael Vincent Meegan. I am currently the Rudder's company NCOIC and Ranger Challenge NCOIC at Texas A&M University. Been here for 2 years, going on my third now, and it's been a very interesting and awesome position. Let's say that, to say the least.
Our history, for those who are listening, you and I were basically privates together a long time ago in Ranger Battalion. Now, I'm very excited to announce the first official sponsor of the Redacted Culture Cast. Obsidian Arms is one of those companies that reflects the many facets of gun culture. Not only are their firearms frequently found on competition fields like USPSA and 3-Gun, but they are a Minnesota-based, U.S.-sourced original equipment manufacturer. Obsidian Arms makes their own punch and tool kits for the amateur and professional gunsmith out of Little Canada, Minnesota, that come with a lifetime warranty. Whether it is fine parts that require a Swiss machine, or you're in the design phase and are looking for an American machine shop that is in tune with the needs of gun culture, go check out Obsidian Arms at obsidianarms.com. Thank you, and now back to the show. We were having a little bit of a conversation before the show, just kind of catching up on who's been where for the last 10 years. And one of the things that you're bringing up was how one of the things that you brought up was how you went from very much so the line, which was something that we're familiar with, but the line being in the deploying pattern. This is the idea of, like, okay, you're on a direct assault team, you're doing the job, and then you transition for a while into more of an instructor role.
Yes.
How can you rebuild that story? And because I think it's easy to lose. Even for me, it's like it's easy to lose like what the terms are referring to and where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely. So, grew up in the Army, obviously in BAT, which is, for my money, the best place that anybody could ever start in the Army. If you're able to, if your MOS is able to take you to that path, right? But certainly for infantrymen, if you get the opportunity to, grow up in battalion or do some time in battalion, it will pay dividends for you in your chosen profession for years and years to come. So I was very fortunate, very lucky to have had the opportunity to grow up there from 2010 to late 2015. I was in SECO 375, so Charlie Company, 3rd Ranger Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. Did my entire time for the first stint of my career in 3 Charlie, so 3rd Platoon. Served in capacities from being a machine gunner up through a senior team leader in that environment there for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, multiple rotations. So being in that environment, like you were saying, you're going, training for combat, deploying for combat, sprinting on deployment, running operations, training in between operations. If you were to be, stood down for whatever reason, sometimes you're on a break. We shot the wrong cousin at some point in time, and now the strike force is shut down for a couple of weeks or whatever. So you continue to train for your job, which is, of course, hitting targets, right? And then you're back. Then you come back, a very short window of off time. I wouldn't say there's really any decompression time because you rip in the same way that you ripped out. There's no, big affair of it or anything like that. You just come back, you unload your shit, you pack it away, go on a little bit of leave, and then turn around and rinse and repeat. So same cycle again and again and again. And so that's what I was in. That's what we were all in, when you grow up in battalion on the line. I had an opportunity in 2015 after my last turn with SECO, getting back from that in late August or September, had the opportunity to take a position over at RSTC as an instructor for small unit Ranger tactics. So basically pre-Ranger instructor. And at that time, I was newlywed. We wanted to start a family. My wife and I, we both needed a little bit of decompression, because as you could attest to, like, the line will chew you up and spit you out, no matter kind of where you're at eventually. But I think from our experiences, the both of us could tell you that 3 Charlie in 3rd Ranger Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment was probably the most buttoned up and high intensity platoon of maybe any platoon in the regiment, which is the most intense unit for light infantrymen in the entire Army. Just the level of expectation and performance there goes above and beyond. I'm thankful for it, but it will wear on you. So I was tired. So we went on and accepted the new path of being an instructor over there. And I'm so thankful that I did that, for that, that change in perspective, because it helped me understand my job better when now I was forced to actually teach it at a high and coherent level, right? Teaching small unit Ranger tactics, patrolling, how it all fits together from the bigger perspective, right? When you're on the line, especially with time sensitive targets and whatnot like that, when you slap together a con op, you're playing your piece of the pie and you're part of the position, right? And then when you move up into that higher echelon of leadership, you kind of start to learn your job a little bit better. When you go and you teach platoon operations, albeit through the lens of a schoolhouse, right? Ranger school patrolling, you really do have to now understand everybody's position and piece of the pie and how to coherently put that together through troop leading procedures, the 8 troop leading procedures all the way through in each phase of the operation from start to finish. And it really does broaden your understanding and your ability to do that. And then on the flip side, not just with the instruction, but also the management, you can be in a position where you are the lone NCO responsible for the accountability, training, and welfare of a class of 60 students. So now your span of responsibility control has gone from, the squad size or team size, or if you're platoon sergeant, even platoon level 25 to 30, somewhere in that neighborhood. Now you've doubled it. And oh, by the way, these guys are all, they're Ranger Battalion privates, but they're privates. So they're still, very young, impressionable, kind of ignorant to things. And you have to take a vested interest in them and get them from A to B and develop them. So I thoroughly enjoyed that time.
So, and this is one of the things that I was looking forward to having a conversation with you with, because there are things that I remember from battalion. I remember going to pre-Ranger. I remember, and I remember all these little kind of anecdotal dots along the line, but I don't always remember. I don't always have like the words to describe what they are. And so for those who are not familiar with life inside battalion, or life inside the military, or specifically Ranger Battalion, what is pre-Ranger? What's the relationship and significance of teaching small unit tactics to people who are already in the unit so that they can go on to Ranger school, and kind of, can you demystify some of that?
Yeah, sure. I think I can take a crack at it. So, when you come in the Army, the pipeline used to be, it's changed a little bit since, but the pipeline used to be, you would come in, you go to basic training, you would get your option 40 contract. Either you'd earn it at basic, you'd come in with it beforehand, whatever would be made available to you. You would then go to jump school, you passed jump school, and then you were picked up for Ranger assessment selection phase one, if you're, coming in off the streets, right? And then you would go do your 8 weeks of RASP. Prior to that, it was RIP. I understand that nowadays that pipeline's a little inverted. They make them go to RASP first before going to jump school, so that people weren't just using it to get a jump slot and then quit, right? So anyway, I digress. When you come in, you make it through that, you get to battalion. When you get to battalion, you are going to be taught the things that are germane to what the battalion is doing at that time and what the battalion considers to be mission essential task list training to validate for deployment, right? So if they're running time sensitive targets, point raids, those kinds of things like that, you are going to learn how it is that ACO, BCO, CCO, and in your platoon does those things. There is overarching, doctrinal fundamentals that are going to always be there, but it is very TTP and SOP driven when you're getting to the line, right? Because you are operating decentralized as different platoons and whatnot like that, and different AOs and different times, right? And the enemy gets a vote, so SOPs and TTPs kind of change there. As opposed to so you can have a Ranger private that's very well versed in how ACO 275 second platoon does this, right? Whatever this is, whether that's, inner clear room, whether that's knockout bunker, whatever that is. But when they get sent after that, needing to get their Ranger tab, okay, so they can be in battalion for a year or two. And then if you want to solidify your position in the regiment as a leader, you now have to go attend U.S. Army Ranger School and become Ranger qualified. So the regiment, in preparation to make sure we have a high, success rate with these things, we have a pre-Ranger program nested within the 75th and have for years. CERT, Small Unit Ranger Tactics. We teach you how to be successful at the performance measures that is going to be, and the performance steps that will be expected of you, regardless of your prior experience at the line.
And that is how it is. Like when you get to your squad and your platoon in battalion, they're already oriented towards what the next deployment's going to be, where it's going to be. So if you're going to be up in the mountains, if you're going to be here, if you're going to be in this arena, and what your task org is going to be. So you're going to be kind of narrowly focused for a while.
As they should, to be fair, right? As they should.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because the guys that are, in leadership positions are already Ranger qualified. So they understand the broader picture of things already. Now they're honing down the game plan, if you will, for where they're going and who they're fighting, right?
Yep. Which does make a lot of sense. And I think I think it can be easily taken for granted. That decentralized capability that your squad leaders, your platoon sergeants can say like, hey, we're gonna kind of shift this a little bit and focus more on these activities because this is what we're going to be doing more than say patrol based activities.
Right.
All right. So then pre-Ranger is also so there's. Ranger School has always had kind of a double impression because it's been, on the one hand, it's generally thought of as like this big school you get to go to or you have to go to. It's like, oh, he's Ranger qualified. It's this kind of big deal for those who are outside of battalion or even outside of the Army. It's like, he's Ranger qualified. Like that means something. Ranger, commando, he can do certain things. But then for those of us who were in battalion, I also remember it having a very distinct caste system, CASTE, where there was a very big difference between people who had the tab and who didn't have the tab. And so I can understand it was like it was kind of like presented as almost like a second rite of passage, sort of speak. But that's a very different mindset. Like for the individual, me going back into being a private, thinking about what was it like at that time. I can remember getting ready to go to Ranger School because I wanted to get my tab because I wanted to move up to the next level. I wanted to become a team leader. I wanted to sort of get out of the doldrums of being a private. And but that's a very different perspective that's the perspective of the individual, or me, the kid, the private, who wants to get his tab, so he's no longer treated as a private, and he also wants to go on and become a team leader and pursue his career or his further activities. But you came back to CERT to change up the way that it was run a little bit, so that you were talking earlier about kind of like the R. Well, I think you said POI, but like the percentages and what that looks like, and how to take Ranger privates from all their different disparities, different places, different platoons, and prepare them specifically to be able to pass Ranger school.
Yes.
What was that like, and what was that like, and did you ever run into sort of like schoolisms where you're like, okay, this is how the school's going to grade you, but this is how we do it in real life? And did you have to make any distinctions there, or was it pretty streamlined?
Yeah. So actually, all the time, right? And even on my own show on Ranger U, I talk about sometimes like, okay, this is a schoolhouseism. And this is how it would actually apply or would not apply, right? And I think it is important that you do generate those caveats when able. However, even if the specific mission sets that you would encounter in pre-Ranger or in Ranger school, may be a little antiquated or not quite what you would expect running at the battalion level and or at the platoon level in a special operations environment.
A schoolhouseism is something that you and I are familiar with, in the sense of that, in the way that there's a way that you've been taught to do a certain thing, like let's just say linear ambush, whatever, and you've possibly even done it in country, on a deployment, and yet when you go to a school, they do it a different way, and they have and some of those ways don't make sense. I'll use an example for you. I'll use an example on this one. When I went to Ranger school, I had to do mountain phase twice. The first time I did mountain phase, I didn't get a go on my patrol, which go, for those who are listening, is like you have to get, in order to proceed through Ranger school, you have to accomplish certain things. One of them is you have to be in a leadership role during a certain activity, and then get approved, right? This makes sense. You need your instructor needs to essentially say that yes, you did the thing correctly enough. So I was a squad leader in mountain phase on a linear ambush, and we were supposed to initiate the linear ambush with an AT4. So I took I took our squad and I put them up on a hill, kind of. It was actually more of a ridge line, maybe about 100 meters tall, overlooking the road, about 300 yards or 300 meters away from the road. So it was a little bit further than we would have liked, but we were initiating with an AT4, and the idea in the ambush is that we would also be the base of fire. So I had a really easy job. But I decided to put the guys on top of the hill because we're using an AT4, and I had used a Gustav on a couple of deployments. So I was very, very familiar with backblast.
Yep.
Well, the instructor wanted us to have, for whatever reason, I think because of something to do with the distance to the road, to make sure that we could also be like a secondary assault force if we had to. He wanted the initiation of he wanted our squad to be the initiation at the bottom of the hill. Right. And I'm thinking wood line. I'm thinking backblast not clear. I'm thinking everyone's going to have a TBI. And so we were not in agreement on the location, because I put the guys right back past the crest of the hill so they could come up, shoot their rockets, and then if we need to establish a support by fire position. Whereas the rangeism, the schoolhouseism was, well, you need to be 250 yards or meters from the road. And I was like, so that's kind of something that I saw that I would have benefited from if I knew, they're looking for these things.
Yeah, a schoolhouseism is, they have those locations and objectives picked out, right? And then what they want to see you do is go through the performance steps, because the Ranger Handbook is derived from Doctrine, but it is prescriptive in nature. It's going to tell you what they want you to do and how they want you to do it. For example, a schoolhouseism is assaulting through the kill zone. You're going to do that in Ranger School. You're absolutely going to do that, right? You're absolutely going to do that in almost every single patrolling schoolhouse you go through. Well, in ATP 3-21.8, infantry, platoon, and squad, that's not a performance measure. You don't have to assault through a kill zone. You can be stood off from a kill zone, hammer the kill zone, get the positive effects you wanted in that kill zone, and then you can withdraw. You never have to exploit it.
Ooh.
So once again, you see, there's a difference between real world tactics and some schoolhouseisms. Another schoolhouseism would be like coordinating for trash pickup at your patrol base. Who the hell's going to do that in a real small unit deep behind enemy line infiltration environment? You're packing that stuff out every single time. You're reducing that signature every single time. So that's another schoolhouseism, right? Yeah, like knowing those kinds of differences between the schoolhouse and then, actual world tactics, there are going to be examples of that. However, overall, because what you're learning in the Ranger Handbook is derived from, actual infantry doctrine, it is still juice worth the squeeze to understand how to maneuver and accomplish your missions in a small unit environment like Ranger School. Schoolhouseisms aside.
All right. So then how have you seen let's see, we've had Chris Sizlove on the show, another former 375 guy, and we were talking a bit on Doctrine itself. So as you matured through years in battalion, how did your perspective on what Doctrine is and what it should be and how you relate to it, like how did that change over time? Because eventually you had to teach and then you had to lead again. You were, you went on to more roles on the line. And
I think the appreciation for Doctrine grows with your maturity as an NCO, as a teacher, as an instructor, and as a leader over time. Like you have to dig in and find the answers to a lot of these things as you progress in your responsibilities. For example, like how many times on the line do you remember seeing guys crack open ATP 3-21.8 or ADP 3-90 or FM 3-90 tactics? How many times did you see that? Zero times. Exactly. Right. It came from a place, I think there was a disdain for Doctrine. Well, that's what Doctrine says. Doctrine's stupid, man. The Doctrine's dumb. No, it's not. We've derived everything we've done TTP SOP wise at some point in time, somebody checked it against Doctrine almost every single time, because it is the common language for how we fight and how we get things done as a combat force, right?
Okay.
Do we follow it to the T? No, but there are overarching principles of it that just simply don't change. One of them being like fire maneuver, set piece, moving piece. That is a overall arching principle that's just not going to change, and that's derived from doctrinal basis.
So let me see if I can understand this in a model format. Are you saying that at the time that when we were privates, one thing that I remember is that anything that came across as too intellectual was viewed with suspicion. Now I think that was more of like a cultural effect. New atheism was still kind of popular in America. We're kind of getting off in a tangent, but that was very much so like your if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't need the fancy words kind of thing. And so the question, the model that I'm asking was that a period of time? If you go back and you look back and across all these different data points that you have, was that suspicion or disdain for Doctrine more of a timeline thing that was just there was too much I can probably rephrase it, where the Was that something that was relevant for a period of time because of the attitude of battalion being not necessarily suspicious of doctrine, but having so much of an emphasis on flexibility that it like didn't pursue doctrine, or was it something that was just higher than our level that we couldn't see as privates and team leaders?
I think that's a good question. I think, obviously the higher ups, as like I said, as I've grown in maturity as an NCO and moved up to higher echelons of responsibility, I've had to get back to doctrine and doctrinal terms and things to answer questions and bigger and grander level questions at not just the tactical level, but you start learning a little bit of the strategic and operational game, and you're talking about unified land operations, and now you really got to get into some doctrine, right? When you're operating in something like the 75th Ranger Regiment in special operations, you have a very specific task and purpose most times, and it is very niche. We in the 75th, we didn't really talk about armor, anti-armor, how that rolls into things, and like grand scale level aerial support operations, and how to integrate mechanized infantry with light infantry, all these things like this. So you have to dig into that stuff if you're going to start bringing that together. And from my perspective of leaving special operations and then going more conventional and having to hear about these different mission sets and how this all ties in together, it drove me to have to get back into, taking a look at doctrinal things. I think also at our level at the time that we're referring to in battalion, just like I was saying at the beginning of this episode, there was so much rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And you knew that these different training goals needed to be met to validate the battalion to deploy for combat. I think it got to a spot where we were kind of in this rut of like, this is what works. This is what I need you to focus on because we need to get validated, because we need to deploy to go do our job.
That makes sense. Like I was saying earlier, I deployed 3 times before really going through a training cycle.
Right.
And some of that was because I got into battalion right before RO9 deployment, and then I went to a language school after that, and then I changed companies after that. And so it was just like, it was very quickly, well, not after language school, but deployment, language school, deployment, change companies, deployment, and then I came over to SECO. So it was just like, I'd been around a bit. So, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So at the time, they weren't there. At the time, the pace, the tempo was so aggressive that that the battalion itself didn't necessarily take the time as a whole to focus on doctrine. It always had a task in front of you. Hey, we got next week is platoon live fire. Next week is we got to do this. Next week, okay. So instead of talking about doctrine and sitting down and having that conversation, we'd sit down and be like, okay, how do you do platoon live fire? Because we really don't want to do this for 2 weeks. We just want to get in and out and be done with it.
Not only that, but we were fighting an insurgency. So you're talking about a coin fight. You're talking about counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. That's very different from a LISCO fight or large scale operation against a potential near peer adversary. The regiment, since the I guess you could say the official end of the GWAT with the pullout of Afghanistan. When I was leaving, we were switching our priorities, in some ways to more mirror that more large scale operation and how we fit into that, sort of role. And there was a lot of very aggressive growing pains and hard lessons learned about, hey, this isn't just a time sensitive, point target anymore, right? We have to actually employ some real world doctrinally based, warfighting functions as a battalion, as our piece in how this all works. So it got interesting.
So do you think how if you were to go back to your younger self, right? Or if you were to, as you're in a teaching role now, you are teaching young students. How do you how do you bring that up to, how do you demonstrate that to someone or is that something that's just kind of over their head at the time? And what I'm talking about is, again, you're right. The GWOT has been the global the global war on terror was the rise of special operations as like its kind of isolated element. And we had the brown fence. We were always separate from everybody else, and sometimes to the level of our identity. Like, oh
Yes.
no, don't touch me. Don't like I remember getting out of battalion and and working with SEALs, Green Berets, and so on and so forth after leaving the military in a completely different capacity. And it was interesting observing how those different units saw themselves and taught their people how
Yep.
to interact with others. And battalion was extremely isolated at the time.
Oh yeah, and I think it also, the culture we're talking about at that time in battalion, there was also a latent distrust of anything that didn't have a tab or scroll. So
for sure.
It was just like, no,
Yeah,
you're wrong. This is wrong. And again, like the culture's there's a very distinct and defined culture in regiment. You can feel it the moment you walk in there. It has its own energy. You don't,
for sure.
So yes, absolutely. We were insulated, to say the least. And, when mission sets change and geopolitical situations around the world change to where the Army is now potentially going to be used in different ways, that means the regiment is going to be used potentially in different ways. Every soft unit would be used in potentially different ways. And, when you become so siloed in what it is that, you believe, and this is how it's done, and this has been the cycle, there's going to be natural growing pains that come with it. The great thing about regiment is it's chock full of guys that I believe can do whatever it is you're asking them to do.
Oh yeah.
The level of guys that are there. I mean, I get asked often, what is special about the 75th Ranger Regiment? And other than the guys themselves, nothing is the answer. Nothing. Because at the end of the day, the 75th Ranger Regiment is a place that is devoted to doing the basics savagely well. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here is like, where do our basics come from? Well, ironically enough, the unit that's the best at doing the basics are derived from the doctrine they don't want to hear about, right? So, you hear officers talk about the block and tackle, organization, but again, it's that fire maneuver. It's being great at whatever skill level you're at, 1, 2, 3. The constant pre-combat checks, pre-combat inspections, setting things up for efficiency that makes sense, drilling down on every aspect of marksmanship, whether it's in a CQC environment, a KD environment, all these things. And we have to constantly get back to those basics because we're the only special operations unit, or the 75th is the only special operations unit that carries privates. So it's our strength and it's also our glass ceiling at the same time, that allows us to constantly get back to our basics, where complacency is just savagely murdered every single day, because you have to be the example for that new flood of young Rangers that are coming in there. You got to teach them. So, and they're going to challenge you. And if you're not up to snuff, they're going to take your job. You're going to literally train the guys that are going to rip your job out of your hands. So it's a highly competitive, but also a highly efficient organization because it has to constantly drive itself back to the basics.
Okay, so sometimes I've heard it said that in battalion we eat our own.
We do.
We do, like
directly or indirectly. Yes, you eat your
okay.
own.
And so but you're saying that's sort of that's the secondary effect of something that brings so much good to the battalion, which is this return to basics and competitive what do you want to call it? Attitude, tone,
competitive culture, competitive nature. Absolutely.
Yep.
competitive. Now it's a fine line, because, you know, you don't want to be competitive to where you become toxic. And there are times that's certainly happened, but there's also a sweet spot of competitive nature where you're getting the best out of the entire organization while you're building it up at the same time. And, you know,
that makes sense.
A place like the 75th has to exist where the standards are rigid, the expectations are high, the culture is just savagely driven by guys that are just, you know, just studs. I mean, absolute, you know, killers, pipe hitters. Like, we need an organization like that. The thing is most people don't survive very long in an organization like that. And I'm not talking about just like on the battlefield casualties. I'm talking about the grind of that over time, physically, mentally, emotionally. Like, it is a constant sharpening of the blade. And, you know, it's not a place where there's a reason that the average career length in the regiment is only about 4 years. It's about one turn, right?
That was exactly what I did. I did 4 years in and then kind of moved on to other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that time, maybe we thought of it as like, oh, well, there's kind of these big exoduses from 375 or from the Ranger Battalion, as the idea was that the wars were coming to an end and there were all these other kind of things. But what you're saying is the reality is, no, it's pretty common for people to do one solid 4-year pump and then just kind of move on to something else.
It's a hard place to be. It's a hard place to stay, and it should be. We need a place like that. We need a place where you can take. There's only so long that you can be the very best at what it is that you do. There's only so long that's sustainable. There's a shelf life on that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sweet spot that you hit where everybody's synced up and you are undoubtedly the best at what you do on the planet. And at one point in time, 3 Charlie, 375, that platoon was the very best fighting force on this planet. You cannot convince me otherwise. But it's not a long timeline that happens. There is a pressure and a grind that, you know, eventually this guy's going to slip, that guy's going to, this guy's tired, and because of the level of intensity and focus that takes. And as exhaustive as that is, you also miss it incessantly.
For sure.
Think back to a time when you know that your shit was wired tight and you were one of the very best at what you did, right? Like I said, a place like that does need to exist. It's just, it's tough to stay for a long time.
So before we get into where you're at with Ranger U now, if you could go back to yourself as a team leader, or even then as a private, not really go to your, you know, say, but if you could go back to like, all right, if I could be a team leader again, I would put more, I would make sure that I did this. What my example of this one is like, if I could go back to being a team leader, I would make sure that I spent deliberate, like during, because this was, of course, in the faster rotation time. So yes, we were doing the platoon live fire, squad live fire, making sure all that kind of stuff worked out. We had all of our tasks ahead of us, but there was time where time was lost in battalion. And what I would do is I would go, if I could go back and be a team leader again, I would want to spend time with the squad and my privates building an area study of where we were planning on going, so that they could start to understand not necessarily more of the culture, like, oh, well, you know, in Afghanistan, showing the bottoms of your feet is considered a rude gesture, or don't shake with your left hand, or whatever like that. Or, but like, that's something that I would have liked to have done, is being able to take the guys and take the team and look a little bit larger at what we're doing here, not what we're doing to get the task job done, but like, I would like to have seen, I would have liked, I wish my team leaders were able to, and it's not that it's a dig on them, but able to like help establish the bigger picture a little bit more when we were going over to Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, that totally. I agree. I've thought about that before, of how do you play at your position better while you understand the game better, is definitely a concept for sure. For me, this applies to me on a personal level, but also on a leadership level. Is something that I've come to the realization of over the last couple of years, that if I could go back to a young Mike Meegan and tell him this thing, young Mike Meegan would probably tell me to, go pack it. But because you couldn't tell that guy anything. But
you were okay. You weren't the worst.
Yeah, it would be. I was very results oriented, with no understanding of the process of how to get there. And that is something that I've been very, very big on over the last couple of years as an NCO, as a leader, as a teacher, mentor, personally, right? Constantly trying to remind myself to get back to that. Is you don't get to a mountaintop by looking at it. You have to walk. You have to take the steps. Looking at it isn't going to get you there, right? You can talk about it all day. You can say, well, this is what I want. Here's my goal. Okay. Well, what does the process look like to get there? And when you can become more in love with that process of accomplishing what it is you're working to, and really hone down and really enjoy that, before you know it, you've accomplished what it is you wanted to do it, and you never even noticed. And I think there's a lot of people that don't understand how to break something down into a process of training or a decision making, or how you're going to carry yourself, or just, again, the choices that you make on your way to whatever said goal it is. They fixate and focus on the results only. And if the result doesn't go the way that you wanted it to, you get down on yourself. You compare, right, to other people that are achieving those things. And I think we've all heard that comparison is the thief of joy. There's a lot of people that spend a lot of time wrapped up in their own bad self-talk, depression, unhealthy fixation on the things that they haven't accomplished yet. But what do their processes look like? What are they actually doing to get there? Are they getting up early enough to accomplish this thing that's going to allow them to do this thing? Have they really broken down what the actual barriers are to this goal that they're trying to accomplish, or whatever the result is, right? Whether it's a fast mag change, whether it's shooting 40 on the qual, whatever it is, what are the subtasks that we need to really focus on and really kind of become in love with to get to that end result? That's what I would tell a young team leader, instead of just screaming at his guys for, not getting it right? Like, how do we break it down into the smaller pieces of this task to eventually be able to get these guys to get it right?
So you're, in sarcasm, your advice to former team leaders: don't be too team leader about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I think we all did it for sure. First rotation team leaders for sure. Second rotation, you start to kind of figure it out. By a third rotation team leader, you become sort of the Zen team leader. But
I love this. I only did one, dude. So I only did one rotation as a team leader, and then I was on my way out the door. But that's hilarious. The Zen team leader.
A little bit.
Yeah. That's amazing.
You start to kind of see, you start to kind of peek behind that curtain and maybe start to figure out the process stuff. To be honest with you, I didn't really kind of come to that realization until really kind of my last year at CERT, where I started, like, light bulbs really started to click for me. And then now in my current job at Texas A&M, working with these ROTC cadets, you definitely have to be process oriented, because if you're going in there with the expectation that this is going to go great, even after a year or 2 years of training these guys, it's cyclic. It comes back around again. You have to constantly get back to that. Like I talked about with Battalion, how you constantly have to get back to that, driving back to the basics. You got to fall in love with it. A lot of people look at it and they go, "Oh, it's Groundhog Day. I hate this." You got to learn to love it, and turning on those light bulbs for those guys that are coming through, because it might be your 500th time of doing it, but it's that guy's first time. So what kind of impression are we actually going to make here? When we talked earlier a little bit about CERT too, Small Unit Ranger Tactics, we were talking about how it had a 50-something success rate, and then it went up to like a mid-80s success rate. What that had to do with was when we had a really good group of cadre that came in, we had a really good NCOIC that came in, and we changed the culture to focusing on students first, right? That what it was that we needed to do, what did preparation and planning and execution look like? What did the process look like to where we wanted to go as a POI? And we took a customer service approach to and invested in those kids as what did we want? What was the product that we wanted to send back to the battalions to be future leaders, as opposed to sitting there and quote unquote tab guarding. And you alluded to it earlier when you talked about it as being like a rite of passage to get your Ranger tab. We didn't want to look at it like that anymore. We wanted it to look at it as this is something that we have, and I want to build you up, and I want to show you how it is that you're going to get yours, because you are the kind of person that we want leading back at battalion. And when we made that fundamental change, lo and behold, all of a sudden there's a 30-some-odd% increase in success rate. So when people feel like you've invested in them and you're focused on, again, the process of getting them to where they want to go, and they feel that from you, it will elevate that level of performance.
So while I would like you to break that down a little bit more one more time, but pulling out not necessarily the jargon, but it's kind of describing what that situation, that transition was like from what you referred to as like tab guarding to more like future planning, like development, true leadership development. Because I think I find it very interesting, but not find it very interesting. I think the question is, it needs some context. So when you were starting at this position, the pre-ranger, which we're going to say is in the old timeline of kind of tab guarding, what that meant was if you've got a 50% success rate, because I definitely remember that. Like I remember CERT being some of you will die, but that is the sacrifice that I am willing to make, kind of thing. Right. And I was like, all right, well, I guess
yeah,
that was
and it was the same for me too.
Yep. I think we went at very similar times anyway.
Yep.
So the attitude at the time was very much so this like, well, you need to learn these things, and some of you just aren't going to make it.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting, but it had its point. And then so you were saying that you changed now POI as point of instruction. Is that right?
Plan of instruction.
Plan of instruction. Okay.
Plan of instruction. Mm-hmm.
So you changed, or during that time, you saw a distinct shift from approaching pre-ranger as a attrition game, who's going to make it, who's not, to how do I make these people better so that when they get back to their unit, they have something to bring back to the team. Okay.
100%.
What did so how did you what did that look like on the ground? What did that look like?
I'm glad you asked that question. So I'll give you a vignette. Old pre-ranger, it was cadre mass participation at every single thing. Even though we had 12 to 15 cadre, all the cadre were expected to show up at all times to, everything, like every physical event, every this, that, the other, which I kind of get, but I don't really get. And we didn't really get. And I'll tell you what we did get. We got burned out, right?
Yep.
So there was a frustration and a burnout that happened. Two.
Well, at the time too, you got sent to pre-ranger cadre when you were burned out from the line, like this. And again, I'm curious how much this has changed, because I very distinctly remember this concept of like, well, As soon as you're broken, then we'll send you to something else so that you can go chill out for a while at pre-ranger or rasp or whatever.
Right.
But so long as you're, you sharp and pointy, we'll keep you on the line.
Yeah. Well, this take a knee, right? You don't really take a knee, like and certainly not the regiment, right? But
Nope.
there are workarounds, you know, like good planning, good preparation, cutting that pie into different pieces. Well, we were all eating the pie all at the same time, right? So we had that. Number one. Number two, there was no real class preparation. There were classes that were, PowerPoint format on the drive, but nobody really went through the process of actually really prepare, like really intentionally preparing their class, setting it up, ghost boarding it, doing those kinds of things, rehearsing it before the students to show up. Number three, students were used as manual labor. Hey, move this shit over here, move that over there. You guys, hey, get the chow line set, all this kind of stuff like that, right? And then there was these long sprawling AARs that we would do after every single 3-week POI that really went nowhere. And
AAR, just for those listening,
after action review, of how the class went, and it would just kind of really go nowhere. There was no like actual do outs or intention. It was like we checked the box, we talked about some stuff, and now we're going to do it all over again. There was also an approach, from certain members that it was supposed to be a gotcha course. So like if you didn't put your name on the land nav scorecard, even though you're handing it to the guy, instead of just being like, hey, Ranger, what did we say? Put your name on there. At worst, we give you a spot report. They were dropping people for this. You're fundamentally changing somebody's life and career trajectory over a name line on a rep of land nav. And that's just fundamentally, I never agreed with shit like that. Like it really made me upset. You're talking about a person that potentially could be married with kids, and now they have to uproot their whole family because you had an opinion about how they filled out the land nav card, even though they found everything.
When your job is to shape them and teach them how to do this thing. So you're like, I could see that exactly.
And that was just disregard. I mean, just blatant disregard for like, you mean to tell me now that this was this guy's last shot, and now he has a PCS his family across the country because you wanted to get in a hissy fit about a land nav card where he found 5 out of 5. I mean, and again, like those were the sorts of things that were happening. And to be honest with you, it was trash. Like it was trash. Like I'll say it, right? It needed to change. We had a switch over, a lot of cadre switched over. We had an NCOIC switch over. And right then and there, right away, collectively as a team, we started to attack those dilemmas. And so how was it that we were able to do a customer service and a students first? Well, we knew we had a 21-day POI, and it was exhaustive in the beginning, but the work, the preparation work that we did here paid dividends. We had a binder for every single day of the schedule of what it would look like, with the timelines, where you were supposed to be and what equipment you were supposed to have. We divided that 15 cadre up into 3 different teams. We had an execution team. If you weren't on execution, you were on preparation, getting ready for the next day. And if you weren't on any of those, you were on refit. So you refit your equipment, and you had an earlier day, you go hit the gym, stuff like that, decompress, and just make sure that you were ready for your prep day and then your execution day. And we would rotate like that. Everything was set up prior to the students being there because we had that team concept. So you would have a cadre that would be present with the students, giving them instructions, timeline, whatever. The rest of your team was getting the event set up so that when the students would enter, things were set out already. Everything was already there. Dress, right? And it made a completely different impression on the student body that they were in a place that took itself seriously, and they needed to take it seriously. It's like if you're getting a hip pocket class and you're all in the back in the cages in PTs, and you got a team leader that's reading something off of his phone while he's also dipping and he's half-ass scribbling stuff on a small whiteboard. How is that really an environment conducive to learning, as opposed to going into a classroom where we have materials already laid out. We have the presentation up. We're in the correct uniform. Hey, Rangers, have a seat. Rangers lead the way. I'm Sergeant First Class Meegan. I'm here to give you a block of instruction on raid.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden now we're in an environment where it's like, oh, okay, this is a schoolhouse that takes itself seriously, and I should pay attention.
Yeah. Well, no, that makes sense. It's quite encouraging to hear that the attitude shifted from the CERT as almost another opportunity to not pass, but where do you think that came from? Where do you think that attitude came from for so much of the pre-Ranger selection process to all just be different forms of attrition? Because what I'm hearing from you is that when you approached it, you said, okay, I'll actually go back to the things that I remember about pre-Ranger are really, really silly. I remember having to get I remember spending more time moving stuff around. Every single bunk needs to be out of the barracks. Why?
Yep.
I remember, not necessarily getting smoked, so to speak. We used to call that way, but the things that I remember from pre-Ranger are mostly different sort of games of okay, you have to Ranger instructor comes in, yells at everybody, okay, take everything from inside the barracks and put it outside the barracks. Why? Right. Well, because someone didn't blouse their boots or something. But I want to learn how to do Ranger School raid. I want to learn how to do Ranger School patrol base activities. And I don't want to do it when I'm freezing cold and tired, because I'm going to be doing that for 60 days or 90 days. Yeah. How about this is how you do this well versus, well, are you going to do it now? Everything was all of it for my entire experience was all on the job training.
Yeah.
So.
And believe me, we still got after it. I mean, the FTX, you absolutely still got after it. We still did the physical events, but we put a premium on instruction and training over selection. We're here to be small unit Ranger tactics, the training course, not the selection course, right?
Got it.
You select yourself, whether or not you're prepared to execute the schoolhouse, right? Are you physically ready? Can you survive peers and not be a piece of shit? Can you learn the material to the point where we feel like you're ready to move on? And that's where we did. And where it came from, where that switch came from, look no further than an outstanding group of NCOs, and we had a couple of PLs in there too. Great dudes. Lieutenant Green, Roughton, Sergeant Perez, Sergeant Breda, Sergeant Boyer, Sergeant Stanfield, Sergeant Oliver, Sergeant Morton, First Sergeant now Mishlik, just absolute stud cadre. Sergeant Corey, I don't want to leave anybody out. You guys all know who you are. Great group of guys to work with that really cared about what we were doing there. And it was a collective, contagious, let's make this better. We all went through the crap version of this, and we know we can do better, and let's do better. And so every one of those NCOs that came out of that program, I think all came out for the better for it. And we've had conversations, since being instructors over there together about how much CERT actually really did help in ways that we didn't think it would help in our career progression. So
wonderful.
We also reap the benefits of that as well. When you do good work and you do good things and you put good energy out there and you help people, generally you get some good things out of it yourself.
Well, I want to end on one more thing, and I want to get one more. I'm trying to get one more minute with you and one more thing out of it, and that is, so where you're at now. You're at Texas A&M. I'm a program that I'm not entirely familiar with, and from what I understand, you're working with ROTC cadets at a college, preparing them for what?
Yeah. So Texas A&M is a senior military college. It's the largest commissioning source outside of the service academies. So it commissions the most Army officers outside of West Point most years. And it's a fantastic program, and it's a great place. The product kind of speaks for itself. I think a lot of people are kind of familiar when you say Texas A&M. It's kind of synonymous with the Corps of Cadets, and within the Corps of Cadets, that ROTC program, and within that is my program as well, which is Rudder's Rangers Company and Ranger Challenge. And so I was brought in specifically for the purpose of being the NCOIC and mentoring that group of cadets. Rudder's Rangers is an organization within Texas A&M, Army ROTC, and the Corps of Cadets, where it's technically a student organization, but it is affiliated with Army ROTC. So we give up a body to train it, mentor it, help it grow. It is absolutely the strength of our program. And we carry anywhere from 200 to about 150 or so cadets annually and train them. We give them additional ranges, additional FTXs, and I focus on really nothing but their tactical development. To get them ready for cadet summer training, to get them ready for whatever bullock they're going to, Ranger school, all of these kinds of things after that. And then out of that company also comes our Ranger Challenge team, which is our competition cell. We compete at the collegiate level against other ROTC programs in hopes of qualifying for the Sandhurst International Military Skills Competition, hosted annually every year in April at West Point. We have qualified for that competition several years in a row, and we are the two-time reigning, defending national champions with our back-to-back ROTC Cup wins up there last 2 years, and hoping to qualify again to go back up there and earn the right to defend that title one more time, and potentially take a stab at maybe winning the whole competition, which would be a very first time that any ROTC element will have won the entire competition, because you also have the service academies that compete in that, as well as international teams. So you're looking at about 49 to 50-ish teams that are going to show up and compete, and they're all very good. There's several teams that come from ROTC across the nation that compete in that. And then, like I said, all your service academy teams and all your international academy teams compete in that as well. So it's a very stringent and tough competition that nobody knows about. And it's akin to Best Ranger. It's not as hard physically or as skills intensive as Best Ranger is, but it's close. Like, it's pretty close. It's not far off. And it's done on, instead of a buddy team construct, it's done in a squad. So a team of 11 will compete, 9 males, 2 females, mandatory. And I get the opportunity and honor and privilege of helping to shape and mentor these cadets and coach that team. And they rise to the occasion time after time after time. And they want to do the right thing. I want to do the right thing for them. And I've taken that same formula that I learned at CERT, and we have applied it at Rudder's company to outstanding success. The last 5 or 6 guys that we've sent to Ranger school in the last couple of years after graduation, after their bullock, they've all been successful. We have 3 in Ranger school right now, 1 in Florida, 2 just started up, and I'm sure they'll be successful. We've had iBullock Honor Grad, 2 of them. We've had iBullock Ironman Award. We've had Basic Mountaineering Course Honor Grads, Airborne graduates, Air Assault graduates, you name it. And these kids, they're hungry for it. They give me hope for the future, and they really do. They really do amaze me. I have the best job in all of ROTC and all of Cadet Command. I say it time and time again, what it is that I get to do and who it is I get to work with. And I'm privileged to be able to do that. And I'm glad that we've been able to have that level of success.
I'm very glad to hear that. I'm very glad to hear that, and maybe we can dig into that in the future. I'd love to have I'd love to pick your brain on how small unit tactics. We never got to it. We never got to even get to small unit tactics and like what that is and how do you look at it and how do you approach it. But that's something that I'd really like to hear because you've gone so much further with your career in Ranger Battalion than I ever did, and I'm encouraged by it. Like Mike, it's good to see you doing well. Like it really is. It's good to see you what you're producing over there at Ranger U. So let's kind of tie this up then. Where do people find you? And there's one question if you think you can answer it in let me know. And that would be for me, joining the military was a massive culture shock. Very, very different world than I grew up in. And I think for myself, it was very good that it was so starkly different, but it didn't come without very, very strange growing pains.
Sure.
So when you're dealing with students in a college, I went to college after the military. So when you're dealing with students in a college, how do you prepare them for the culture shift that they're going to encounter when they go into the military?
Honestly, nothing really is going to fully prepare them for that, quite like entering the military, because the military is unique in and of itself. We do a decent job kind of recreating it with, you're just going to be held to a standard. You may be on paper, and mentally a kid, but you will pay adult prices. That's what I tell these kids, right? Is you may be 17, 18, 19, years old, 20 years old, right? Legally in this country, you're an adult when you're 18 years old. And when you're at this program, you're going to start paying adult prices now. You'll thank me later. It's just that, instilling that culture of like, mostly things are in our control. If we're being honest, if we're really being honest, if we're late, it's usually in our control. If we're not prepared, it's usually in our control. Very rarely is there some act of God that comes out of nowhere that there's nothing we could do about it. And it's just giving them that awareness of, the excuses aren't going to cut it, right? So refine your processes to get to this point. I talked about processes earlier, right? It's the decisions we make that allow us to be successful. So start learning that now, because that will pay dividends for you when you go on to the military, which is, again, supposed to be a meritocracy, and it's supposed to be a results-oriented organization. So you better fall in love with the process of getting there.
Fair. Nope. Fair. That's it reminds me of like, it was very competitive, but it had to be. You have to be. It's not that it's not that I think that so much has changed. It's just, I really appreciate the way that you're bringing it up, in the sense that this whole, like, I remember the culture being so like, oh, everyone's got to be alpha, and it's like, well, no, that seemed, it was all aesthetic, window dressing, and now it seems like over the years you've been able to distill that down to what it really means and what you really need there. So thank you for that. Thanks for coming on the show and talking like it's old times all over again.
I appreciate you, Coop, and it's good to see that you're doing well, and I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing with your platform and everything else like that. And if anybody is interested in listening to me yammer on anymore, I've got Ranger U as a podcast. It's available on all major podcast platforms, and then on Instagram, I have a pretty robust following that's growing over there. So that's at r.a.n.g.e.r.u, because I couldn't just do Ranger U. Some guy had it and he has like 9 followers and never posts anything. So I don't know why that person wanted Ranger U, but that's the version I had to go with over there. So, but I appreciate your time. Thanks for having these conversations and allowing me to get on here. I hope that I hope I don't sound too stupid. I hope it was a good show. So
you never sound stupid, Meegan. You don't. It's been a while, but no, thanks much. And we'll stay in touch, and I'll talk to you soon. So, with that being the case, for those who are still watching, there you go. That's when I have to lose my voice. As they're still watching, you know how you can support us. You can head over to redactedculture.locals.com. That's going to be where, if you just want to flat out support the show or the public land cleanups that we're working on, that's where you got to do it. If you want to stay up to date with where we're at, you can also head over to redactedllc.com. And if you know where to find us on Instagram, it's just going to be, we're not the one with the underscore. Whoever has that fake account, you can report fake accounts to whatever Meta does, because they just love to shadow ban the hell out of us. But that being the case, thanks much, Mike Meegan. Thanks for being on. You know, it's really good to see you again, even though it's at distance. Maybe we'll have to make an in-person appearance one of these days.
Sure.
But that being the case, let's close out now. Go forth and conquer.